Hey, welcome to High Resolution. My name's Bobby Ghoshal.
And I'm Jared Erondu.
We're sitting down with 25 masters of the design industry. We're in New York now. It's cold. It's the middle of winter. We don't care. We're outdoors, helicopters flying around, and we're here for one thing. We're here to learn how the best companies in the world approach, communicate, and deploy design.
In this episode, we're speaking with Rochelle King. Rochelle is the VP of Design and Insights at Spotify. She's going to talk about the relationship between design and data, how to define metrics, and how to debate your ideas.
Stay tuned. We're going to get right to this episode after this partner message.
Thanks to Squarespace for their support. Whether you need a domain, a website, or an online store, make your next move with Squarespace. Visit squarespace.com and enter the code HIGHRESOLUTION, one word, for 10% off your first purchase. Rochelle, thanks for joining us.
Sure, of course.
All right, first question. What's one thing about design that's clear to you that you feel is not so clear to other people?
I think that sometimes there's this myth of the genius designer who can go off on their own and just come up with the right answer. But in reality, it doesn't work like that at all. And you can never do design in a vacuum. You always have to involve other people and other disciplines in part of that conversation. So I would say that's the...
Is that something you teach every designer, like every new young designer that comes into Spotify? Is that the first thing they learn?
I don't know if we're that regimented. I mean, it just depends on what people feel. Like some people grow up thinking that that's how it works. And so then, of course, you want to have that conversation about like, no, it doesn't really work like that. Yeah. But a lot of people now, I think, recognize that it's a collaborative sport, that you actually have to involve different folks. And the more different opinions you get, the better off you are. So, yeah.
So one thing I find interesting is, there seems to be a lot of misunderstandings about design. And data seems to be one of the topics that have come up recently, right? And I've been to many events where there are people like just pushing for data in design, but it's pretty difficult without some level of understanding to know how to actually fit data into your workflow, right? So I'm really curious to hear, outside of that, what are some other misconceptions that you find designers have about data?
Yeah, actually, I think maybe we can start by defining what data is first, because that's probably one of the things that leads to the misconceptions. Yeah. So when I talk about data, I think about data comes in many, many forms, and it comes in many shapes and sizes, right? And so there's big data, which is what most people think of when they hear data, and that's, like from results from A/B testing, or you have millions of customers, and that's the data you gather on them. But there's also small data, which is, what you gather from user research or usability studies or ethnographic studies, right? Data is just information about your customers and your users. And if you start to think about that, then it broadens your idea of what data is and what kind of constraints it can put on you. So I think the biggest misconception about data and design is that it somehow constrains you, that it stifles creativity. But if we start to talk about data as not just getting A/B testing results from millions of users, that it's actually all these different forms of data, whether it's, learning more about user behavior or understanding them deeper in some other way, you can start to see how data actually helps to inform your design process rather than constrain it. Yeah. And it actually helps to empower your design process instead of, just deciding, what works or what doesn't.
So do you think data is more than numbers, right? Because it can be observational.
Yep.
It can be words.
It's information.
It's information, right? Because I feel like that's one of the things I get from designers when they think about data. They immediately jump to, oh my God, it's math. I can't do math. Don't show me the graph. Just tell me what it is, and I'll try and figure it. Right? So how do you build that confidence in someone, in a designer, to get them to understand that it's not necessarily about math per se. It's just about understanding and insight.
Yeah. One of the things that I say all the time is that data is numbers, but remember that behind every single one of those numbers is a real human being. And so there's something about being able to make the connection that what those numbers are telling you about or what that information is telling you about are real people, right? And it's real human behavior that we're measuring. And designers always have a lot of empathy for humans, and they really pride themselves on being empathetic to different people. Yeah. So, data helps you be empathetic with not just one person at a time, but with millions of people at a time. Mm-hmm. And if you start to see it like that, then it becomes much more approachable, maybe. are much more easier to see how it bridges back to the work that you're doing on a daily basis.
So it all comes back to human beings in the end.
Yeah, always.
Yeah. So what is the ideal relationship of a designer and data? So when you think about, right, so like a data scientist has a very specific relationship to data. What is a designer's relationship to data?
So I think it's, I often like to think about it as a conversation, right? So designers should be engaging, and you engage in conversations all the time. And it's part of that riffing that creates great work, right? So if we think about data as being this language that your customers are using to talk back to you, right? You did something to the experience. Yeah. Did that improve their experience, or did it, somehow make their experience worse? You can measure that, right? But that's them then speaking back through the data to you about whether it was working or not. And then you react to that, and you try something else, and you put that back out there. And I think that thinking about that relationship as being a conversation where it's informing you, you try something else out, you see if the conversation comes back in this way, like that's actually a really good way to think about the relationship to data. So then it's also something that you don't just use at one point in time, because conversations are ongoing, right? And sometimes conversations between people last for years, right? We're having an ongoing relationship that is changing over time because I'm learning more things about you. So we talk about different things, and then you learn, so that's what I think we're trying to emphasize, is that it's really about creating this conversation with your customers, and data's the tool that helps you do that.
I'm really curious about this relationship you speak about with data, right? You've written a book on this subject, Designing with Data.
Yes.
Okay. And there are 3 terms that you speak about in this book. There is data-driven, data-informed, and the third one I'll let you speak on.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious to hear how you define those terms, because I'm really curious about those relationships.
Okay. So the 3 terms are data-driven, data-informed, and data-aware. And with data-driven design, you know the exact answer that you're seeking, and it can be answered by data, right? And sometimes we talk about that like you're at a train station and you see a train track going, it goes in one direction, it's going to point you in the right direction, and you just need to get to that destination. Data-informed is where you want to be aware, it's not that you just need a clear answer, yes or no, but you want to get some directional indication from the data about if you're pointed in the right direction or not. And so data is just one of many inputs that you might use to making your decision, your design decisions. Other inputs could also be instinct and gut, right? Sometimes we always think that using data means that you've completely set aside the instinct or gut. It's not either or, and I think that's what data-informed acknowledges, is that sometimes you have to balance those 2 things. And so in data-informed, we talk about it like, you're at a train station and you have many different routes that you could go, but you know that you're going to want to follow one of those, but you're just a little bit more open to the different directions you could take. And the third one is data-aware, and that's where we're saying that, there really is, it's acknowledging that conversation between data and the designer. How you design actually defines the kind of data that you can collect back. You're aware of that relationship, and then you use that data to inform, the next thing that you do. And so it's just having a larger perspective on where it is that you're trying to go and what you're trying to get to. And so there, sometimes we use this transportation metaphor of it's not a train or you're at a train station where you know what kind of transport. There's actually a whole world out there to explore, and you might use many different methods to get there. You could get there by train or by walking or by boat or these different things. And so you have a larger perspective of what you might be able to use data for and what kind of data you might use to make that decision. I don't know if that answer was really clear.
Yeah, it is. I actually, so I'm in a design process. Assume that it's one of the classic design processes, right? Is there a moment where data-driven versus data awareness matters, or is it less about the process, more about the problem?
It's about the problem, right? And then the scope of the problem. So when might data-driven make sense? It's like, like I want to know if it should be this, but the word should say this or that. It's a yes or no answer. It's very clear. It's very simple. It's a very simple example.
That's data-driven.
Right? That can be answered through data. You just want to know, do more people click on this or that? I think data aware is when you're really thinking about, like, there's a larger problem space that you're trying to solve, right? And you want to think about remember earlier I was saying that data comes in many forms?
Yeah.
Well, it comes in many forms, and those those data tools have different uses, right? And you want to pick the right tool for the right point in time. And sometimes you'll want to use many of them, and sometimes you might just want to use only one or two of them, right? So you might want to start to inform your design process by doing some ethnographic studies and getting more information from users. And then later you'll build something out with a prototype, and then maybe you'll want to get some, testing data back on that. Maybe you'll want to get a survey, right? And all of those things will add different color and light to your problems. So I think that sometimes it's sort of like, how specific or how narrow is the scope of the problem that you're trying to solve versus how large it is, how many facets are to the problem that you're trying to investigate. Those are all things that I think weigh into that range of where you fit.
So what is the relationship to a designer and say a data scientist or a data analyst?
Yeah. One of the things that we've been talking about is calling them data friends, which are just like people who work with data.
Have you guys made t-shirts?
No, we should.
You should totally make t-shirts.
That's a
great.
totally good idea. But actually, we did have a designer and a person who works with data make t-shirts that said, "I'm with him and I'm with her," for like a talk that they gave. So we've done that. But I think that there should be like a friendly relationship, right? And you should recognize each other's strengths, right? And how actually compatible you are with each other. So one of the things that I think we encourage is for designers to work really closely with folks who work with data, again, whether it's big data or small data, and for them to actually like work with each other to try to unravel the problem or to work with each other to try to understand the results of the data that you got back. So I think that having those conversations is really important, and to not see it as like, I did my bit, now it's in your court, you did your bit, tell me the answer back. It's really about making sure that you're working, more in parallel.
I actually recall in your book you mentioned that designers also have a responsibility to give back to the data collection, right? To ask better questions so that the data team. Can you expand on that a little bit? Yeah,
I think if you think about it, like here's a really dumb example, but if you created a design that has a huge button on it, like obviously the data that you collect, like that design is going to influence the data that you're going to collect, right? And you have to be aware of what your design does to collect that data. And I think it's more about really understanding what it is that you want to learn, and think about crafting designs not to ship them to the customer, but crafting designs to help you learn as much as possible about the customer and what you want to understand about them. It's a very subtle nuance, but if you're thinking that I'm going to ship this just to get it out so you can use it, I'll probably spend more time on different things, like polishing different aspects of it. But if I'm trying to ship to understand if you would rather do this or that, then I would probably craft designs that are very different from each other. One that is optimized for case A and one that is optimized for case B. And then seeing the results from that, I'm going to learn something back.
So it seems like in order for that to work, you have to have an iterative culture, right? They couldn't think that first design solution was the solution if your goal is to learn.
I guess what I would say is like one thing that we have to be careful about too is like iterative is true, but I think that sometimes people take iterative and they mean that only means you're going like small tweak, small tweak, small tweak, right? And I think we also want to make sure that people don't think that when you're working with data, you can only make small steps. You have to also do like large scale concept testing and do different things. So the part of iterative that is important to remember is that this isn't just one ship and I'm done. It's the first in a series of things that I will be shipping and we'll be learning along the ways. And then I start to think about like, okay, in this first stage of shipping, here's what's most important for me to learn first. Then if I get this answer back, I might go in this direction. And if I go and get this answer back, I might go in a different direction. Right? So I'm already pre-thinking about what those next steps might be. Then I get the answer back and I go, oh wow, that's interesting. It was more this one that was correct. Okay, now I'm going to make sure I design for this space and see where in that I want to go. And forks again and again. So I think it's more thinking about the serial nature. And remember we were talking about that conversation? Conversation isn't like you just tell me one answer and then I go thanks and I walk away.
It's two-way.
It's two-way and it continues.
And sometimes the different routes it can go with a statement.
Right. You say, I like action movies, and then I go, oh, really?
She does or she doesn't. Let's see where this goes.
Right. And then I go, oh, yeah, me too. I like this. Oh, yeah, okay. And then we start to build on that. But if I said, you said, I like action movies, it was like, yuck, that's awful. Then you would say, like, okay, I'm going to go this direction instead, right? And that starts to inform your next steps.
So I'm a designer at a company. There is no data person at this company. I've just heard this episode and I'm like, okay, I want to try this thing. I want to try data, right? Yeah. Where do I start?
Yeah, I guess it goes back to the point that like you don't have to have like crazy A/B testing, or millions of customers to get access to data. There's many ways to start to at least practice, using data and forms and like seeing how it changes or impacts your design process, right? And so one thing is like you would go about learning anything else. Like the internet has lots of people publish articles about things that they've tried at their company, the actual data that they've gotten back from those tests, and even just like reading those and familiarizing yourself with what's out there and what's been tried elsewhere is a form of starting to build the muscle of learning how to work with data, right? You can easily go out and start to talk to customers and other folks about like what's working, what's not, and test yourself. I think this will have this impact because of these reasons.
So form hypotheses.
And then like go out and test those hypotheses. And you don't always need to test your hypothesis in an A/B test. Yeah. You can sometimes test your hypotheses by just showing it to other folks and saying, which one works better for you? Well, that's so interesting because I thought you would have picked the other one. And I think another thing that I often like to think about is that what that does for you is actually it helps you to hone your customer instinct. It helps you to hone your instinct about what will work or won't work with your consumers, right? And so every time you every time you test that hypothesis,
so the more often you're right, the more confidence you have.
Totally.
That you don't necessarily need to go back to numbers to know what decision to make.
Yeah, I mean, well, it just builds your gut, right? Yeah, and I think the danger, though, of course, is that like people are changing all the time. The industry is changing all the time. So something that used to be right may now be wrong. Yeah. So it's always you do have to kind of stay in the system a lot and not get so cocky that you feel like I don't ever need to check with my customers about whether or not what I built for them is working.
So if you're proactively thinking about data before you start designing, it sounds like what you're saying is don't be reactive to what you learn. Try and presuppose outcomes, put hypotheses together so that you can build your gut. So it's to do that, do you feel like the data capture process needs to come like up front in the design process?
Yeah, I mean, but that's actually why you have to work so closely with your data friends.
Yeah, sure.
Because like they're going to help you say like, oh, I think this is what I'm going to capture. I think this is the data I'm going to capture back from this design. Do you see that? Is this an accurate way to do it? And by the way, you have to work with your partners in tech and everything to make sure that your designs are properly instrumented so that you're capturing the right data back.
Yeah, so in tech you mean engineers?
Engineering.
Yeah. Exactly. And I'm guessing that not every designer that comes through the doors at Spotify is proficient in this method. So what do you teach them? How do they learn how to become metrics and behavior centric?
I mean, we've actually talked about, as we grow, we've talked about whether or not we would put together an actual like, I don't know, not university, but like a training plan on it. I know other places have actually done that. Yeah. I think Riot Games has done that as well. But really it's about like throwing them, just like getting into the mix and just starting to do the work. We actually did create a small team that was focused on like experimentation best practices. And sometimes they'll embed with different groups to actually work with them. So it's really just through sharing stories, about when people have worked well with data, how it's supposed to work, and actually building a culture around that. That's how you get trained here.
I would argue that most companies are not data-driven and don't really involve it in their design decision-making, right? Instead, they lean more on internal relationships and senior people within an organization. I'm curious what you see are some of the dangers of working that way.
Yeah. And sometimes what you're referring to is known as the HIPPO problem.
Yes.
And HIPPO stands for highest paid person's opinion. Yeah. Okay. And as if that's the deciding factor in what people do or don't do. So I think the biggest danger is that the ideas that get built are the ones that are voiced by the loudest person, or the person who can argue the best, or the person who has special advantages because of their seniority or their position. And what that means is that many times that means that ideas from the bottom don't bubble up, right? So you may not be getting this diversity of ideas that could be coming from the larger organization if it's really just one person's voice or the person who can argue the best. And, I would say that the skill of arguing the best shouldn't be the determining factor in what gets built or not. It should be whether or not the idea is strong and if the idea is good. So I think that what leveraging data does for an organization is that it helps you actually measure, whether or not those ideas are having the impact that you believe they will have. And so at least in retrospect, even if you have a hippo or someone who is always pushing their ideas through, if you can at least measure how successful those ideas are or aren't, you learn something about that, right? So you start to have more clarity around are those ideas, actually those ideas are always awesome and they always do work. At least that then gives more confidence to the organization that this person is in that position for a reason and it makes sense. If they don't always work, then it opens up the opportunity for other people to start to throw in ideas, that can get measured by the same, criteria.
How would a team go about identifying whether or not they have a hippo problem? Or do you think this is an obvious thing that they just know?
It's not, but that's where but usually the hippo doesn't realize that they're being a hippo, right? So, but that's why I think that actually starting to be consistent and fair about measuring the impact of different ideas helps you get there. We've done it here before, and we've done it at Netflix. Is sometimes you take bets on how something's going to perform, and then you place those bets ahead of actually launching the test and getting the data back, and then you can actually see hey, what's my track record now? It's cool, but it's also a little scary because you're kind of putting but I think in the interest of let's all learn together. It kind of throws everyone in the same boat, and in some ways it levels the playing field.
I'm curious, if I'm that designer in the room, that really quiet designer to the back, and the hippo is currently in the front speaking and just guiding the entire conversation, what do I do? How do I present this to the room to actually level that playing field?
Yeah, then you actually have to start by having a process where you're testing ideas against each other, because then it doesn't feel that bad to say, oh, why don't we try something else at the same time, right? But that also implies that you have to have a little bit of the infrastructure in place to actually be able to test two ideas at once. But it doesn't always have to be A/B testing. It can be, let's just build two prototypes. I think this might have some possibility, let me just sketch up an alternative and let's see how those work with each other. And then you get information back and you can say when we got the test back, this one did perform better than this one, right? So I think it's really, designers actually should always be generating multiple ideas and multiple proposals. And even if you're not battling a hippo, you should be coming up with multiple ways to get to the same solution and figure out which of those, means was the most productive. Right, so I think it's presenting it in that light. Here's an alternative idea, or here's another way we might approach it. Right, there's many ways to get to the other side.
So that designer just needs to be the facilitator and advocate for that.
And advocate for that. I think the organization needs to advocate for let's get into the mode of trying lots of things. Why should we try lots of things? We'll learn faster.
Sure.
If we're trying different things at the same time, most organizations want to be learning organizations.
It struck me earlier when you said that. Generally, it's the hippo that doesn't know that they're the hippo.
Yeah.
How would a hippo? Well, so if a hippo,
we're gonna get this clip where why are you talking about hippos so much? They're large water.
Rewind a few minutes, and you'll get the highest paid person's opinion, right? The moment they identify that they are the highest paid person and that their opinion tends to resonate more than others, what should they do? What's the right recourse for them at that point?
Yeah, well, first of all, self-awareness is so much. And then I think that anyone actually who's in a leadership position probably has this problem.
You can easily solve it.
Right? And so then it's just that you have to learn in which instances are you going to be more silent. Maybe don't be the first person to speak. See if someone else comes up with the same idea that you would have proposed.
And advocate for them instead, right? So
yeah, although then your voice is still... right? But it's just but I think it's just interesting to say sometimes you can be silent for a while, and then if your idea hasn't come up and it's the end of the meeting, then you can throw it out there as one more alternative, but now it's one of six. It doesn't become the predominant one that everyone then gloms onto, right? So I think it's a little bit of self-control.
Yeah. Well, I read somewhere, I don't recall where, but I read somewhere that at one point you advocated for debating on your team so much that you actually had stand-up debates live What is that story? Tell us that story.
Yeah, well, it actually started. Well, it started at Netflix because I think Netflix has a strong culture of debate.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like that process of like let's have an argument about like, or let's get into a debate about like what's the best idea.
Yeah.
Right. And I think debate is the right word, not argument, like I said earlier, because it's really a vetting of ideas that takes place, and so it's not personal, right? And there's something that's because of the academic nature of debate that also makes it not personal. But I think that debate is really important for designers for two reasons. One is, as a designer, you always have to be able to articulate your idea, and you always have to be able to logically argue for it and logically express why it makes sense, why your solution makes sense. So that's definitely a characteristic that or a skill that you develop when you debate. The second thing is when you're actually doing a debate, you have to be a little bit open-minded to the other person's point of view. And you also have to be able to listen really well to what they're saying, understand their argument, and react to it, right? And sometimes your reaction might be like, oh, actually, you're right. But sometimes your reaction is like, oh, now I see why you're saying that. Actually, here's a different angle on that, right? And you get a deeper understanding of what they're saying, what their position is back to you. But designers generally are not great at debate, and there's a public nature to debate that is also uncomfortable. But honestly, we're in meetings all the time, and that is a public, expression of your logic and your statement. So we've done a handful of these now here at Spotify, where I'll pick some topics that we might debate, and they're usually actually contentious topics. Right now, it might be like, visual design doesn't really have an impact on metrics or something like that. Or so things that they're hearing in the ether. Sometimes they're like cultural things. Sometimes they're, more design problems or something. We'll write them on a wall. So like each time we've done this, maybe like a handful of folks have shown up.
Is it the same group of people?
No, it's like different groups. The different groups will show up, and then I'll make like a yes, no, and like shake it up in a bag and say like, okay, pick your side. So you don't know whether you're arguing for or against the statement, because you have to get really good at arguing the other person's side. And then so they'll pick a question. We'll say you're either for or against the statement, and then they have like a minute to prepare. Then each side makes their statement, and then they get 30 seconds and they rebut each other. And then usually what we do afterwards is like I have everyone kind of vote for who won the debate.
That's great.
And then we say like, okay, why did you vote for so and so? Why did you vote for so? It's very friendly, so it's not so like competitive. And then we'll dissect and and even give them feedback like, you started really strong with this clear argument, but then you just went on too long.
Right.
And you actually lost power of your argument because you did that. So we actually then start to give tips to each other about how to actually. Did
this ever backfire where a designer argued a wrong position so well that their bullshit meter went through the roof, and where the next time they spoke to their ideas, you had to question whether. That was like you're arguing way too well for this.
No, I don't know if we've had that. No.
I figure that's an edge case, right?
But it's pretty good, and like a lot of folks are really nervous the first time they do it, but then if they do it a couple times, you get better.
How often do you do this?
I don't know. We do it we've done it, like I said, we've only done it maybe like 3 or 4 times in total, so maybe every couple months or like whenever like someone will usually bring it up and say like, you haven't done a debate in a while, and go, okay, let's do one.
That's really cool though. And the goal of this is to get designers comfortable with arguing their ideas and understanding why they actually believe in something.
Standing in front of a group and like being able to make their statement, so it's not just the logical, expression of your beliefs, but it's also standing in front of a group, making that point, having to listen to someone else and counter it. So it's all of those things. Yeah, it's pretty fun.
What qualities do you look for in the people that you hire?
Obviously, like good design chops. Like that's the basic.
And by what does that mean? Like the craft, look
craft.
and feel.
No, but also like UX. I mean, it's UX, UI. It's all of those things. Like can you actually do the job of design? I think that there are certain characteristics that we really look for. So curiosity, I would say, rates high. And it's curiosity about 2 things. One is curiosity about the business. So, wanting to understand, how the business works, what are the important things about that? It would be business strategy. And that's because your design ultimately has to further the strategy of the company. So if you're not curious about, that, how will you make sure that your work ties back together with where you're trying to go as a company? And then curiosity about data, because we talk a lot about it. So like they should be open to, like, even if they've never worked with it before, like curious about, like, oh, how would I do that? How can I do more? And I think curiosity is just like a great trait to have in general. Because it also doesn't presume that you always know the right answer, right? I want to learn more about what you have to say. So,
and where do you think younger, less experienced designers need to spend more time?
I think that there is something to be said about, like, just doing the work and getting better at solving different kinds of problems and getting experience in that way. I think that's something that we were having a conversation about this in the team recently. Is like, there is something to be said for training.
Yes.
And actually, like, being rigorous and disciplined about how you become a better designer, right? So I think when you're first coming out of school, or when you're first getting into the industry, being really thoughtful about getting better at the skill of design and solving problems and those sorts of things is where you want to focus your time.
Seeking mentors and stuff, making sure that you're designing a lot.
Yeah, and just designing a lot and seeing as many kinds of problems as you can get exposure to and trying to solve them. Yeah. And then maybe as you get more mature in the profession, then you start to think about how am I actively connecting that work to strategy, or how am I actively connecting these skills to other disciplines and other functions,
Is there a difference between a design team's value and their principles?
I think that values maybe are everlasting, right? And they're those things that I was like, curiosity is kind of a value that you might always want to preserve. Principles, I think, might change over time. They should not go counter to your values, right? That they go hand in hand. But the way that we've used principles here is that sometimes the principle might change depending on what is the biggest task at hand to solve. So principles to me serve as some sort of a North Star to align towards, to make sure that we're designing in the right direction, right? And that we're not running counter to where we want to go. And values is maybe something more foundational.
Thanks again to Squarespace for supporting this show. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to get a domain, create a website, or build an online store. They offer domains with SSL certificates and WHOIS privacy that you can seamlessly connect to your Squarespace website or online store. They take care of everything for you. Nowadays, your domain is your online identity. It's the first thing people see when they visit your site. It helps build credibility, and honestly, it just makes you look more professional. So why mess it up? Squarespace offers an easy way to find a domain that works for you or your business. They even host it for you, all in one place. So if you've been thinking about getting a domain for your new project or personal site, go to squarespace.com and enter the offer code HIGHRESOLUTION, that's one word, to get 10% off your first purchase. Make your next move with Squarespace. We'd also like to thank our friends at InVision for their support. InVision is the world's leading product design platform, powering the future of digital design through their understanding of the importance of collaboration. They're used by some of the most innovative companies in the world, like Facebook, Capital One, Netflix, and Airbnb. I work with remote teams all the time, and I found that keeping a healthy dialogue is really important. Without it, building strong work relationships gets a lot harder, and that leads to poor collaboration. I've also found that prototypes are a great way for me to show my full vision for a design, and this helps cut down a lot of back and forth. InVision makes all of this really easy. You can rapidly prototype your designs and collaborate across every stage of your project, taking your ideas from concept to code. It simplifies virtually every aspect of the design workflow and makes collaboration a core part of the process for everyone, from project managers to designers, developers, and writers. Teams that build digital products are at a serious advantage when they use InVision's suite of prototyping and collaboration tools. It's the best way to get everyone on board. Visit InVisionApp.com/high-resolution for 3 months free.
So Spotify now has got, I'd say, maybe a world-renowned team. Like, everyone loves the design from Spotify. I certainly have seen it evolve for many years personally. What was the state of design when you came to Spotify a few years ago?
So when I arrived, the design team was really small. For product design, it was maybe like 7 people.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was very small.
How long ago was that?
Just over 4 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, so we've grown a lot, and I would say the discipline of design wasn't well established at all.
Sure.
There was actually no user research team at all, so those are all things that we had to kind of establish. So really, really under-resourced, which I think is actually a common problem at a lot of companies, is that design is often under-resourced. Not very mature within the organization, just meaning that the discipline wasn't very established. So a lot of people didn't know what design was or how they should work with designers, things like that. And then I would say probably the team just felt very fragmented in and of itself. So that's pretty much the state of what it was like.
And I mean, you came from Netflix, where you had a much more established design organization and research organization, so that must have been a shock.
I think that, well, no, it wasn't a shock because
You knew what you were coming
interviewed
into?
and I knew I knew what the state was. You know, I think that I enjoy.
Duh. Crap. What did I walk into?
No. So I think, I mean, like, but that's what's exciting sometimes about companies like Spotify, is that you help to build that, you know, journey together, and you help to establish the team, and there's lots of opportunities in establishing a team as much as there are like in working with a really established team. So those are the differences. But I think that the differences were, team was just, you know, how established was it? How much did people know how to work with design as a discipline? I would say that there are also some things that just like, even creating best practices, like, hey, let's have weekly all hands meetings. You know, at that time we were very small, and so like just getting into a rhythm of things like that, that just help designers communicate with each other. Those were all things that were missing that we needed to get started.
What were some of the unforeseen obstacles that you came across coming in?
Oh, I think I'm not actually sure if I have a good answer for that. You know what it is that sometimes when you come into a situation where you have to build something from scratch, it's not that the problem itself is difficult, it's that there's so many steps and so many things that you need to fix along the way, right? So we don't have a lot of designers, that's really easy to address, let's just hire some. Oh, but we actually didn't even have a great established process for hiring designers. Okay, then let's establish that. Oh, actually, we don't have a standard for how we do, or recruiting, or we didn't have, so all of those little steps are very easy to solve because the answer is very obvious, but when you actually have a lot of them piled up, then that's what starts to become more challenging. So it might have been unforeseen and like, okay, actually the complexity is not that it's a difficult problem to solve, the complexity is in that there's many of these things that we need to address, and then figuring out in what order do we attack them.
Yeah. So you spoke about some of the things that you had to focus on when you came here at Spotify, but I'm curious what your first 6 months looked like and what you prioritized.
Yeah, so I think in the first 6 months there was a lot of just actually understanding what was it that was unique to Spotify. That's certainly like we have a strong culture, and like also it's a Swedish company, so for me, it was also about like actually understanding what it was like to work in a global organization like that. Really listening and understanding to what were people's perceived problems and what were the real problems that people were having. And then, like I said, because we were so under-resourced, it was pretty clear that the first order of business was just to hire, and to bring in some of that design expertise from places where we had folks that, were designing for millions and millions of customers and so forth. Yeah.
When you and I talked before this interview, you told me a really cool story about the TP meetings.
Oh, yeah.
Is that something you could talk about? That would be a lot of fun to.
Yeah.
Which eventually
sure.
became TPD meetings.
Yeah.
Defining what all those
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly.
So when I joined, like I said, because design wasn't established, when there were all hands in the organization, there were tech and product all hands. So TP was tech and product. And that, of course, actually makes total sense because there wasn't really a design discipline that was established. But one of the things that we really talked about, I talked about with my tech and product counterparts, was that we wanted to establish this relationship, because I truly believe that the best products are built when you have tech, product, and design working together and working harmoniously together as a unit towards the same goal or to achieve the same mission. And we just bring different perspectives to that problem, but we have to all be in sync about what is it that we're trying to solve and what is it that we're trying to accomplish. And so we would talk a lot about tech, product, and design, TPD. But like I said, when I first joined, we would have these all hands, and it was called the tech and product all hands. And so, sometimes the changes that you make are just very symbolic, but simply just asking, hey, could we rename that meeting to the tech, product, and design all hands meeting was just an act of symbolism that we needed to do. And honestly, it's not as though I got any resistance to it. It's not as though anyone objected. It's just that sometimes you just have to ask. And no one will think to ask other than you. Right? So that's where you have to take.
They're not going to invite. You have to ask.
Yeah, and it's not that they would have resisted or had any, issues with it, but you just, have to have the courage to ask for things that sometimes seem so.
And it almost feels like you need to humble yourself to ask, right? Because you don't want to seem trivial. To the whole thing, because it's like adding a letter to a meeting feels like a trivial thing.
Totally.
But in that story, it was everything to bring design literally to the table at these meetings, right? So did you guys get up on stage and start showing designs?
So one thing was, I think when we started too, like most of the subject matter was presented by either tech or product counterparts. One thing that I'm really proud of now is that when we have these tech, product, and design, like TPD all hands meetings, is you actually see an equal number of folks presenting from each of the disciplines, right? And I love it actually when we have presentations about one project and you have different folks from each of them talking about their purpose in the project, right? Or what they contributed, and you can see how it all comes together. So I think that's just like that's the thing that I'm actually, one of the things I'm really proud of is like being able to see all of those disciplines on stage together talking about the same mission or the same goal.
So if there's a design leader listening to this right now, and they're kind of in the same position you were in a few years ago, other than having the humility to walk up to someone and say, please include me in these meetings, are there any other tactics you might use here to make sure that design actually has a voice in these all hands?
Yeah, or in any project. Right?
Really any project, absolutely.
I do think that sometimes we feel like we can change behavior simply by talking or by telling folks like, I'm important, my discipline is valuable, trust me. It works much better and much faster when you actually just get to doing the work. And so I think one thing is, find a problem that is really meaty, that you are uniquely skilled and able to solve, right? So there's got to be a problem in your company right now that is that your unique skills as a designer, you're especially equipped to help solve. Team up with someone, in another function that is well established, or team up with someone who can be a strong ally for you, but also a witness to how much value you brought to that thing. And then basically you kind of prove it, by piloting this way of working or piloting, what it is to have design in the conversation.
It's almost like a sponsor project or a sponsor person, individual.
So I think find those teams or the group or those people that are especially open to and hungry to work with you. Start there, get some momentum, and then now you have something to point to that you can say look, that actually worked well.
What is the design process at Spotify?
So we don't, I would say we don't have a very first do this, then do that, and it's very prescribed. I think depending on different projects that we've done, we do different things, right? So sometimes we have done design sprints, sometimes, we're doing other things, and I think we're still in this very much of a forming stage as a company, where as the environment changes, whether that's competitive environment or even our team grows, the process that used to work when you're a 7-person team doesn't work when you're a 50-person team, or doesn't work. It doesn't scale in that way. So we don't, I can't say that we have an exact ABC prescribed regimented process that we follow.
But what are some of the things that you try then, outside of the design sprint?
So we do, so one is that I think we do a lot of prototyping, asking people to come in, and try things out. Working closely again with like our partners, like our data friends, like whether they're user researchers or data analysts, to understand what it is that we're trying to capture, what's the information we're trying to capture. We do a lot of back and forth with product, trying things out before we actually go and ship. So prototyping, those kinds of conversations, design critiques, like those are all things that I think most design teams do as best practices. I would say that we use a lot of those.
And Spotify has a testing lab, I heard?
Yeah, we have something, we try to name everything like with music. Yeah. So we have something called Soundcheck.
Okay, nice.
And what Soundcheck is that it's run by the user research team. Every 2 weeks, they run a soundcheck. It's all day long. They invite in customers from, like people from who may or may not be Spotify users into the offices. Yeah. We do it in London, New York, and Stockholm, so you get a good perspective. And you just know that it's an open slot every 2 weeks that people can put things into test. So what's nice about that is that you can kind of count on every 2 weeks there's going to be an opportunity for me to get some stuff in front of customers. Awesome. Okay. And then they just kind of collect, okay, who's got stuff that they want to test this week?
That's great. And the researchers find people, so the designers are focused on the work, not necessarily...
and designers are usually sitting in the room and actually
with the researchers.
On the other side. So we have like we have one of those
glass.
We have one of those one-way mirrors.
Oh, one-way mirrors. Yeah.
And so they're sitting on the other side and they're seeing their work get tested.
That's awesome.
And actually in that conversation, developers will join and product owners also sometimes sit back there too. So like you have the whole team that's working on it. Sitting behind the glass and watching this stuff get tested. So it's just nice to have that rhythm. And of course, if there's a big project, then what we do is we schedule special sessions just to research that. Yeah. So.
And have there been any like crazy wins or outcomes from the testing lab?
I think there's always surprises. Yeah. There's always things where you're like, oh, I didn't think that was going to work that way, or oh, I was so sure that was gonna that I nailed it, and like it was awful, right? So there's things like that that happen all the time.
Yeah, I'm going to look at the camera now for a second and just let our community know that if you're listening and you hear a lot of noise, we are at Spotify HQ. It's lunchtime in New York City, so bear with us. Just keep listening, right? Yeah. I don't know if the sound is picking up, but I figure that'll be useful. Okay, so now we're going to jump into some community questions. Okay, so what we've done is we've reached out to our community. We've asked them to tell us what's on their minds.
Sure.
We have 5 questions for you, and we're going to start with this one here. How do you explain the role of design to people in your business?
Right. I think it's really important for designers to remember that what you're trying to do is really further the strategy of the business. Yeah. Right. So design helps you, create an experience that actually expresses the strategy. That's generally how I put it.
The second question is, how is the design team organized at Spotify?
So this is a little bit more complex, but I'll start with the smallest unit, which is we have these things called squads, and a squad is made up of developers, product, and design, and so they're a unit that sort of works together to, create the product, to build the product. So every squad has a different, mission. Now we have so there's a designer embedded in a lot of those squads. We have groups of squads that form a tribe. We have a lot of this, and so the tribe has a larger mission that is probably all aligned. So we have a tribe that's focused on subscription business, for example, or a tribe that's focused on the ads platform, right? So those are 2 different tribes, and then we have those things grouped into a larger group called alliances. So the alliance is this larger mission, which is revenue. Yeah. Right. So we have designers at each of those levels. Right, and we talked earlier about the TPD structure. There's a tech, product, and design lead at the tribe level, and there's a tech, product, and design lead at the alliance level. Yeah. And we do have some designers that are not associated specifically with one squad or another, and can kind of float. But generally, you're still aligning towards some mission. Mm-hmm. And then those different alliances have different constituents. So I was talking about revenue. Yeah. There's another one focused on consumer. There's another one that's focused on creators and their teams, so artists and their teams. So those are the different ways that we think about it.
And as a quick follow-up to that, can designers move between these squads?
Yeah. I think that's sort of like also natural career progression. Is that I think sometimes you find that the kind of problem that one group is solving is, would be better for your skills, and so you can move there. So we try to keep an open mind, for that to happen.
I actually want to break from script from the community questions real quick. Sure. The way your team is set up, right, and the fact that you guys have 2 big offices, one in Stockholm, one in New York City, and I know you hire designers in both locations. Are there any interesting learnings between the relationship of the cultures of the United States and Sweden?
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes when I get asked this question about cultural differences, people think it's sort of like in the way that you work or your style, like communication style or something like that. Yeah. And I think that for me, the biggest learning about actually having designers in both offices is that it just makes you fundamentally more aware that there's a larger world out there. Right? And we have so many companies that are really headquartered or like only based in the U.S. or so headquartered in the U.S. that the American culture just dominates what we expect the rest of the world to consume. And I think it's been an interesting, for me, learning, having been based in Sweden and having Spotify headquartered in Sweden, to really learn that having a global perspective is much deeper than cultural stereotypes about, people from this country are more aggressive, or people from this country, are really self-centered, or all of these sorts of stereotypes that you have. It actually goes deeper into understanding like your place in the world, and that what has worked really well in the U.S. or the things that we just sort of take for granted will not be the case for the rest of the world. And really appreciating and understanding that is I think the thing that I've learned the most about those.
And as a quick follow-up to that, I'm really curious how Spotify teaches those understandings or those lessons to people who come into this business nowadays. Yeah.
One thing I will say is that we probably talk about it a little bit more just because there's so much self-awareness that the company is a Swedish, based company. Yeah. So we often talk about how there haven't been a lot of these huge internet industry stars that have risen outside of the U.S., or even outside of Silicon Valley to some extent. And so I think that actually feels like a point of pride for Spotify to feel like we need to carry that torch forward. So one is probably we are just a little bit more self-aware about that role that we play in the industry. Secondly, designers travel back and forth between, we do have to work with each other in the different countries. And so just the act of traveling to Sweden for work, and having to go there for business, not for tourism, right, makes you start to appreciate different things about it. And I think a lot of these subtleties are things that I can't tell you, but that you'll learn over the course. You have to experience them. But luckily we have enough exchange between those places that happens.
That's incredible.
Now, cutting back to the community questions.
Sure.
Here's the third one. By the way, that was that segue was well worth it. So the next community question is, if you're the only designer in a company, how do you convince your company of the value of design?
Yeah, this actually goes back to some of what I was saying earlier, which is like, just get to work. Like actually like go find that sponsor or go find and like show the value through the work that you do, and show that value by showing how you're actually making something better than it would have been without you there. I think that's the best way to convince, and I think also remember that you're there to serve the goals of the company. And so when you talk about your work, don't talk about your work for the sake of the work. Yeah. Talk about your work and how it furthers those company goals. Yeah. Right? So I can say like design is really important because it, helps, make sure that things are easy for all our customers to use. Yeah. So that we can gain market share. Just make sure you're clearly creating that bridge between the work that you do.
So the narrative is less about design itself, more about...
Yeah, less about design for design's sake.
Yeah, it's not pushing the pixels, it's pushing the business forward. That's the thing.
There you go. Cool. Yeah.
And moving with this design-aware mindset, how can a designer measure and present design results within their business? Yeah, it's
exactly the same thing. Yeah. It's like, then tie it to so what are, you're in marketing, what are the metrics that you care about the most? Or you're in a different part of the business, what are those metrics that you care about the most? Well, let me tell you the story of how what my work does impacts those metrics. Let me make sure that bridge between my work and how it's going to be measured is very clear, that I have clarity around how they're tied together, and that you then also understand it. Yeah. So I think that that's the most important thing in presenting the work, is to always make sure that you know who you're presenting to and what they care about. Yes.
So we made it to the final question.
Great.
All right.
Okay.
As the function of design continues to evolve, what are some roles and methodologies that will emerge over the next, say, 5 years?
I don't know if this is answering your question exactly, but I think something that I've noticed, or something that I've spoken about with other design leaders, is that there are certain skills that designers have, either naturally or that we have to develop if you're going to be successful, that really lend themselves to leadership. You know, how leadership is being defined going forward, right? And so some of those skills are facilitation, like synthesis of ideas, you know, really being able to, because I think fundamentally design is problem solving. And so you can solve problems in an interface, or you can solve problems, you know, in strategy, or problems in organizations, or problems in business. And I find that the designers who are aware of that being the nature, you know, their job is like looking for patterns, you know, coming out with insights, emerging with a solution that they can present articulately well, clear storytelling. These are all things that I think we're starting to see in leadership that we appreciate the most, which has changed, I think, from what leadership used to look like 10 or 20 years ago. Maybe where leadership then was a little bit, you could rely a little bit more on command and control type of leadership, rather than like a rallying, you know, synthesis and storytelling kind of leadership. And I think so I think that that's actually a new role that we should be thoughtful about.
So it's about learning so if you're a designer, learn the skills that help you bring other people along in the process, and include them in the process. Like that's the...
Yeah, that's true. And I think that what that does is it sets a great foundation for becoming stronger leaders for the industry in general. Absolutely. And not just like sort of constraining ourselves to the realm of design. Yeah. Right?
Cool.
Okay.
That was great.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Hey, you made it to the end. Congratulations. Thanks for watching the episode. I really, really hope you liked it. If you did like it, please leave us a review on the iTunes store. And by the way, if you have any questions that came up because of the content that we covered with our guests, go on YouTube, go on Twitter. You can tweet us, you can leave us a comment. We'll get back to you. We'll help you as much as possible. @HighRes Podcast. That's the screen name or the handle for Twitter, for Instagram, for Facebook. Find us, talk to us. We want to converse with you. We're not going to leave here, by the way, without also thanking our friends at Searle Video. They've been an amazing partner on this entire project. So Searle Video is a creative studio based out of Portland, Oregon. They've helped creative communities tell stories for over 10 years. They've done advertisements, behind-the-scene footage, and documentaries for companies like Google, Slack, XOXO Festival, Adobe, Intel. They're incredible. They've traveled with us through the entire country documenting these stories with our guests. That's incredible. Thank you so much, Searle. Listen, if you're a startup looking to elevate your product, if you're a big company looking to humanize your brand, if you're someone in the creative community who just wants to tell a story, you've got to check out the team at Searle Video. It's searlevideo.com, SEARLE video.com. Check out our friends at Searle. Thank you so much, guys. You guys have been incredible on this project.